The Restoration and the 18th century literature, Puritan period. Here is our learning objectives. Puritan period spanning from the early 1620s to the mid 1660s. Puritan literature emerged during the 17th century as part of the larger Puritan movement. So, what is the Puritan movement? The Puritan movement was a religious reform movement that took place in England. So, the Puritans moved to England because they want to cleanse England or their country from Roman Catholic beliefs. Here are some of the characteristics of Puritan literature. The first one, we have religious devotion. Puritan literature is deeply religious, focusing on salvation, personal faith, and living a moral life. Their literature connects God and the people. The next characteristic is plain style. Puritan writing uses simple, clear language. So Puritan believes that straightforward writing is the best way to share religious ideas. Next characteristic is moral and didactic content. When we say didactic, it is about teaching. Puritan works aim to teach moral lessons and guide readers toward righteous living. The common forms include sermons, religious pamphlets, and stories with clear messages. Here are some of the writers during the Puritan period. We have John Bunyan and Anne Bradstreet. And here is an example of a poem during the Puritan period by John Milton. As you can see, even their literature or their form of writing their faith comes from the Bible. Now let us move on to the Restoration period, which started from 1660 to 1700s. So at that time, King Charles I was the king, but he was beheaded because at that time England was a Protestant country, but he married a like a Catholic princess. And then there is a war that happened, but the English throne is empty because King Charles was executed. So the leader of that war was Oliver Cromwell. So they decided to put Oliver Cromwell to the throne, but Oliver Cromwell doesn't have a royal blood, so he isn't called King Oliver Cromwell, but he is called Oliver Cromwell Lord Protector. So he ruled the England for a lot of years. But then Oliver Cromwell died, so his uh, son Richard Cromwell he reached for the throne, but his rule ended so fast because he failed to reach his father's achievement. So the people at that time, the parliament, decided to restore the line of King Charles. So they decided to put Charles II to the throne of England. So there is a restoration that happened. There is a restoration to the monarchy. There is a restoration of the king to the throne, which is Charles II, the legitimate heir of Charles I. The restoration begins in 1660, the year in which King Charles II was restored to the English throne. So it is called the restoration period because King Charles was restored to the throne. So he is the legitimate heir of the English throne, which is next to his father, King Charles I. The period from 1660, when the English crown was restored, as Charles II became king, to 1800s saw the vast transformation of English society and English politics. So, of course, there's a new ruler to the throne, so of course, there is also a transformation to the English society and English politics, as well as significant developments with English literature. With the restoration of the monarchy came the restoration of the theater after being shattered by the Puritans' rule. theaters opened almost immediately. So during the Puritan period, they are very religious that they think that entertaining yourself or having fun is a kind of sin, so they closed the theater. And of course, the theater at that time consists of sexual topics. So theaters is really a sinful place for people to go. So they closed this. But during the Restoration period, they reopened the theater because there is now a new ruler, which is King Charles II, and the people at that time now have the freedom to entertain themselves because the Puritan period ended. Playwrights like William Congreve and Aphra Behn pushed boundaries and challenged societal norms through their works, addressing taboo subjects and exploring complex human ideas. So of course, now the playwrights, the writers now have the freedom, or they are very liberated to explore new ideas and address taboo subjects like sexual topics. So here is a poem by Aphra Behn, which is entitled The Disappointment. So if you will read this, you will notice that the topic is all about a sexualized woman, and this is a perfect example of a writer or a playwright that is exploring taboo topics. Writers began experimenting with new forms and styles, such as the heroic couplet popularized by John Dryden. So when we say couplet, it is a two-line poem, and heroic because it mostly talks about heroic deeds, but it doesn't really mean that heroic couplets only talks about heroes. It also explores other topics. Next is satire emerged as a powerful literary tool, with authors like Jonathan Swift using it to critique society and politics. As you all know, satire is a literary device or figures of speech that is used as a sarcasm to critique society and politics. Now you can see in this slide is a poem by Geoffrey Chaucer, which is entitled The Canterbury Tales. So Canterbury Tales is a book, I guess, that is composed of 24 stories. And these lines here is actually a long poem. And these two lines here is called a heroic couplet, which is just a fragment from a poem by Geoffrey Chaucer. 18th century literature from 1702 to 1800s. So the 18th century, known as the Age of Enlightenment. So why is it called the Age of Enlightenment? Because it emphasizes reason, logic, and the pursuit of knowledge. So people at this time no longer believe superstitions. They now use their rational thinking and their reason, with philosophers like John Locke and Voltaire advocating for individual rights, liberty, and rational governance. The novel. The 18th century gave birth to the novel, an extended fictional prose narrative as form of literature. The novel continued to develop into a major literary form of the 19th century. So if you will be asked, when did the novel emerge, you will say that it emerged during the 18th century. So here is an example of a novel, but I guess this is not from the 18th century, but this is a type of a novel, which is entitled Pride and Prejudice. I guess this is very popular, and I guess you all know this novel. So here are some of the prominent writers during the 18th century. So we have Daniel Defoe and of course Jane Austen, the writer of Pride and Prejudice. We also have Alexander Pope and Jonathan Smith. So that ends my report. Thank you so much for listening.